So we're going to do this tonight. I'm Tim. For those of you who, for everybody I didn't meet last week, hi.
Which is everybody.
I'm so sorry I didn't make it last week. Really, I was like really not happy that I wasn't going to be here. But I'm glad to be here tonight. And I will be here every other week if I get it all off.
If American Airlines allows him to be. So,
Yes.
I'll start off. March 5th, 1988, I married my best friend, Tim Martin. We have 3 kids, Amy, Sarah, and Tyler. Amy's 38, Sarah's 34, and Tyler's 33. And if Tyler would have been here today, we could have just asked him to take his shirt off because he's got 1 Corinthians 4-7 on his chest, like nice and big.
He's almost as muscular as I am.
He's a bodybuilder, so he's kind of like, so one day, it might be saggy, but anyway, we joke a lot with our kids. So there you go.
Today is not that day.
Yeah. So we have 2 great kids. Piper's 11 and Bryson is 7. We are just feels like football. Football. That's what we are. No, we're not. We're just finally really starting to understand what covenant is, and I feel like we're going to spend eternity really unpacking that in our marriage. I was born in Wichita Falls, Texas, and raised in Comanche, Oklahoma. So if you go to Egypt and you go south about 30 miles out into the country, that's where I grew up. It's 1 red light, 2 4-way stops still, and we lived about 8 miles outside of that one little stop. So I was out in the middle of nowhere. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and I was the oops baby. They did not plan me, they did not want me, they were like done. And there's 13 years between me and my oldest sibling, and 5 years between the one that's closest in age to me. So they were done. My parents were always in church. We were always in church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Sunday evening, Wednesday nights, all the time. The doors were open, we were there. But there was chaos at home. So we had one face at church and one face at home. There was a lot of chaos. My brother that was 5 years older than me there were car chases, 3 county car chases, there were guns, there were police officers, there were sheriffs. He was in and out of jail. And I remember in 5th grade, I was at Falls Creek Baptist Church Camp, and we'd just gone through this horrific fight at home, and my sister-in-law was pregnant, and my 2 brothers were fighting over a loaded shotgun, and he grabbed my sister-in-law, and he was kind of strung out on drugs, and I was scared to death. And I go to camp, and this guy shares his testimony about how he encounters the Lord, and he was strung out on drugs, and God saved him. And I knew that if there was a God that could save that guy, he actually shot his mother, and as she was dying, she was forgiving him. I was like, God could save my family. So I gave my life to the Lord, and in 1981, at the age of 16, back at Falls Creek Baptist Church Camp, they did a call for pastors, and I walked down the aisle. I don't know how I got down the aisle. You ever end up somewhere and you're like driving, you're like, I don't remember driving. I think I got lost. You just kind of zoom out. All of a sudden, I'm at the altar, and this sweet little pastor leans over and says, "Oh, honey, only men can be pastors. You need to sit down." So that began my journey of rejection from birth. Felt like I finally found my place in the kingdom to be told that as a woman, I didn't belong.
Yeah. I was also born in Oklahoma, but on the opposite corner of the state. I was born up around Tulsa.
Where there were trees.
Where there were trees and hills and stuff like that. It was, lived kind of in the suburbs. My mom was a teacher, my dad was a computer programmer, so we went to church on occasion, definitely on Christmas, sometimes on Easter. I knew there was something out there. I knew it was bigger than me. I didn't know what it was, but my mom actually showed me, read to me John 3:16 at some point. I was like, I don't want to die. This says I don't get to die. Okay, I'm in. But eventually I gave my life to the Lord at about, when I was in boot camp, a little bit older. But in between there and boot camp, I was just a regular kid wandering around and thinking everything was okay. My parents were married. I got an older sister, a younger brother. Lived in kind of a smallish town, but everything was fine until junior high when my parents got divorced. And then all of a sudden, the rug was pulled out from under my feet. And I made two decisions at that point in time. One, I'm not going to let my parents' divorce affect me. And two, I'm never going to get divorced. I didn't realize at the time that those two vows are kind of self-defeating. Okay? Anyway, so I struggled through high school, wind up doing stupid things, don't get arrested. I've never been in jail, but I've been at jail. Typical partying stuff. I finally go to boot camp, and when I was just after I graduated high school, and I think at this point.
Yeah. So I graduate high school, go off to college, and I've always been the perfect girl because you in a world of chaos. A lot of times you either become chaotic or you become, I need to be the peacemaker, right? I need to be perfect, and I need to make sure that I don't do what all my crazy siblings were doing, and they were all doing stuff. So I was like straight A student, salutatorian, all the perfect things, went to church, made all the right decisions. I go off to college, and just I lived in this bubble of a little bitty town, and everybody knew me, and I thought I knew me, but I was what everybody else wanted. So right? You ever do that? Yeah. So I get off to college. My second year at college, I meet a guy, and he starts taking me to restaurants, which we didn't go to restaurants, and whining and dining and spending all this money and time on me. And then he proposes to me, and I say yes. He gives me a big old ring, and I'm like, wow. And so we tell my parents. I meet his parents, and then I find out that he's married, and then I find out that I'm pregnant, and then I find out that he's a drug dealer, and he actually was grooming me for prostitution. Wow. So my whole world of the perfect little girl came crashing down on me. I was blown away, and so I was pregnant. I had to make a decision. I had people offer to pay for abortions. I had a couple of guys, friends of mine, offered to marry me. We didn't know each other yet, and I just decided, I was working on majoring in social work at the time, that I'm just not going to ever get married, because no man will love my child like they would love their own children. So I made a vow, and I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to protect this baby, and I'll raise this baby all by myself. So I had my oldest daughter, Amy, and I built walls, lots and lots of walls.
Yeah. When I met Dawn, I had moved down to OU. I was going to school to get my degree and to join the Navy and be a Navy pilot. I met her. She'd already had Amy, and I thought she was married at the time, but it turned out she wasn't. Anyway, so we kind of hit it off. Eventually, she agreed to marry me under a couple of conditions. One was I would cut my credit cards, which I had one.
With a lot of money on it.
Had a lot of money on it. So I had to cut it out. The second condition was I had promised to attend church wherever she wanted to attend. Okay, so here we are. Yes, we'll do that. So, because I knew I was missing something in my life. I was saved, but just barely. I knew there was Jesus, and I knew, okay, I went down the front, so I obviously done that part. But I knew there was more. And this is someone who looked like she knew where she was going, what she wanted, and she was not compromising anything. I was like, could tell there's something in her that I needed, that I could benefit from. So yes, I agreed to this contract. I had no idea what I was doing, what we were doing, but we did it.
Neither one of us knew what we were doing. So I came in with a lot of walls, a lot of rules, a lot of stipulations of, and Jesus was always there, even when I fell off and got pregnant and, made all of the decisions that I was making that led me down the course that I was in. I always had this relationship with him. I always knew that he was there. And I almost lost Amy actually I was about 4 months pregnant, and I started to the baby started to miscarry, and I was in the hospital, of course, single, all by myself, nobody with me, and I encountered Jesus, and I told him if he would save her, I would raise her in his presence. And so when he proposed, I was like, Jesus and Holy Spirit have to be center, because I made a promise. And but I didn't understand covenant, because I grew up in a house of very contractual, if my mom got the food on the table at 12 o'clock, because we lived on a ranch, so there was lots of stuff going on all the time. And lunch every day was the big dinner, the big meal, 12 o'clock on the dot. If it was 12:05, my dad wouldn't talk to her for a week. 12:15, it was horrible. So he was okay if she met all of the rules. And some of them were unspoken rules, and sometimes we didn't know why we upset him. He would just stop talking to us, which was better than the anger, but still there was this fear all the time, and it was contractual. If you do this, then I'll do this. If you don't do this, then I'm going to withdraw and withhold my love. So that's all that I knew. So I started, when we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, I knew there was a call on my life. From that, even though I struggled with that, you can't be a pastor because you're a woman thing from that wonderful man once upon a time, I knew the call on my life was real, because Jesus was always right there and in the front. And I knew that he wanted to be in our marriage, but we were missing covenant. We were missing deep connection. And we moved to Jacksonville, Florida. Tim was in the Navy. He was becoming a pilot, and he was doing all this awesome stuff. And I began to learn about inner healing. And God started working on my heart, teaching me about his covenant that he made with me, that when I couldn't, he could. When I wasn't, he was. And he never withdrew his presence. He never withdrew his promise. And I was so hungry for that kind of unconditional love in my life, because I'd never experienced it. And as I was serving in the church, then God opened a door for full-time ministry, and I started working at a church in Jacksonville, Florida.
Right. Just in case you're wondering, I adopted her oldest daughter when she was
right after we got
married. So
she was 2.5 when we got married, 3.5.
So yeah, I adopted Amy about 3. We had 2 more kids right away. So by the time I was 25, married, 3 kids, just like that. So we had a lot going on. I was also, the Navy full time, flying P3s out in Jacksonville, Florida, and that was my dream job. I always ever wanted that. And but you can't always control your circumstances. One of the things that was cool about this, even though I agreed to this contract of going to a spirit-filled church, one of the benefits of that was I met the Holy Spirit. And
changed everything.
Her dad gave me a guitar and taught me a few basic chords. I learned how to play guitar, and so I was basically, playing for her youth groups, and I was just loving it. It was a lot of fun. And then things started kind of falling apart a little bit. The Navy decided they had too many pilots, and so instead of me doing my dream job, all of a sudden I was unemployed, wandering around the house in a bathrobe with no direction in life. And so, I wound up, we ended up moving to Atlanta, and she would have jobs, and I would go and kind of serve with her, and we would do that thing, but I was still bitter on the inside. And I would wind up doing things that it's just, I'd be angry and not know why. And that's Romans 7:15. For the things I do not want to do, I do. The The things I want to do, I do not do. But the things I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. That was a defining verse in my life at that point in my life. It's not a good verse to have as your defining life verse. Yeah, I was bitter and angry. I would lie, I would disconnect, and I was just powerless. I was living a life of powerlessness because we're outside of connection, we're outside of covenant. Did not have the power of God in my life, and my life was reflecting my career. I was aimless and I was lost.
So here we are. I'm 28 at this time. The pastor that I'm working for in Jacksonville, Florida, gets hired to take over Acts 29 Ministries in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a big parachurch organization bringing renewal to all the different streams. And he moves up there and he moves us up there. And I'm 28, have 3 kids, and I found my sweet spot. I am speaking at national youth conferences. I'm training youth pastors from all over the world. I am doing this stuff, and I'm like, finally feel like I'm walking in what I was created to do. And I was just fully alive. I had a youth group. I was training people in our church. There was all kinds of amazing stuff happening. And the Lord asked me, we were what, 4 years in? And Tim was so unhappy. He was working a desk job in the landing pattern for the naval base up there, and just miserable. Watching those planes land, and he wasn't a part of any of it. And so the Lord asked me to lay down my dream, my desire, my passion, and to choose Tim. It was really hard. It was really, really hard. I had to die to self. I had to trust God. And so I resigned. The Lord told me the exact date our house would sell. And I told the church that I was working for that I was resigning. This was going to be our last date. And they were like, there's no way you're going to sell your house in 2 months and move by that date. And I said, well, I don't know, but that's what God said. And it sold on the date he said. We moved on the date we said. People in the church were like going, you're missing God. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. People in the community that were connected to Acts 29 Ministries were telling me I was missing God. I was not hearing what he was calling me to do, except for the pastor that moved me up there, my spiritual father, and he was like, Dawn, don't let the ants biting at your feet get you down. And I'm like, I know what you're saying. And he was telling me to keep plowing and keep going forward. So trusted God, and we moved to Tyler, Texas, which I told you all a little bit about a second ago. But I started to become bitter. I got a job making minimum wage as a receptionist for a group of psychologists, and he was working in a flight school and
Making
no money.
Making less than minimum wage.
Yeah, he was getting certified to be a commercial pilot at the time, going back and getting some training for that. And we were barely making it. I mean, we were on food stamps, we were on everything, we were surviving. We had no money really coming in. And that bitterness, I saw it start coming into my heart. And was invited to go to a women's retreat, Hetty Lee Brooks, and she spoke on Romans 4:17, and she said, that's what the scripture means when it says, I have made you the father of many nations. He is our example and father. For in God's presence, he believed that God can raise the dead and call into being things that don't even exist yet. And she taught us that weekend that we need to call forth those things that do not exist as if they are. And she said, you need to go home, and if you're married and you're not where you're supposed to be, or your spouse is not who they're supposed to be, you need to start declaring life and calling forth their true identity, and you need to start walking in your true identity. So I came home, put on my big girl pants, and said, okay, God, let's do this thing. And I started aligning my voice with the prophetic voice of the Lord. And I started speaking life into my husband. I started speaking life into my kids. Started speaking life into myself. Speaking identity over myself. And things began to shift.
Yeah, up until that point, I'd been working as a flight instructor, which was kind of on again, off again. I got a job. I had a couple different jobs. None of them really were going anywhere. But she started speaking life, and so I started seeing myself not as a failure anymore, but as a person in process who could go somewhere. I got on. She also conducted this DISC training, which is a personality inventory.
Which we'll do in the class.
We'll do in the class. Highly recommend it because it's important to know that you're not made wrong. You're just made how God made you. I was thinking that I was not enough because I wasn't an entrepreneur. I wasn't making a whole bunch of money and all this stuff. I was always battling identity issues. When I learned through the test that she was training, like, oh, I'm made exactly how God made me to be. And I need to align my life with how He made me to be, not how I think He should have made me. So, with that, I got on with American Eagle Airlines at the time, and we wound up eventually moving to. No, we're actually commuting from Tyler, Texas to DFW at this point in time.
Yeah, so Tim was commuting back and forth, and I went to a wedding back in Atlanta, and to my spiritual father's house, and his daughter, who had grown up in my youth group, and he got me cornered, and this bishop got me cornered, and they said, Dawn, it's time. And I was like, what's it time for? And they were like, it's time to get back in ministry. And I was like, I don't think so, because there's not anything in the town. So I came back and started applying for jobs, and I actually Tim was commuting back and forth from this area, from DFW to Tyler, and I got a job at a Spirit-filled Methodist church. They exist. God started to realign things, and it was different this time. I didn't want to do ministry alone anymore. And I started making room for Tim to do everything with me, but he was still not completely present.
Yeah, healing is a journey. It doesn't happen just like that, okay? Even though I was starting to step into my dream, come closer to what I was wanting to do as a career, little bits of fulfillment here and there, but I was still I knew there's something missing. Something was not exactly right. I was still missing something. I still serve in church. Sometimes I serve as a worship pastor, the worship leader on the church. I'd play almost every Sunday morning on stage. Her husband, she was the youth pastor. I was assistant to the youth pastor. It was still a ton of fun, really super involved all the time, but there's still something amiss, you know what I mean? I had what's called an avoidant attachment style, where instead of facing conflict, I would think that love meant avoiding conflict. And so instead of confronting things, I would be whatever. The problem is,
Make a joke.
Huh?
Make a joke.
Make a joke instead, as you can probably tell. Anyway, it ended up in some unhealthy behaviors. One of the behaviors was I ended up making friends with a flight attendant, a female flight attendant. I didn't tell Dawn about it, and she found out about it. I didn't go anywhere romantically, but just keeping that from her was a huge problem. When she found out about it, it's like as if I might as well have been. It was wrong. I was hiding things from her, and again, I had no idea why.
And I didn't know why either. It felt like a betrayal, like a huge betrayal.
It was a betrayal, yeah.
And he had a friendship that was outside of our relationship, and I had to forgive him and rebuild our trust, because trust is not something just somebody deserves. You have to build trust, and when you lose trust, you have to rebuild trust, and it takes time. At that moment, I'm working for a pretty abusive pastor, and then I go from there to another place, to another church. I was there 7 years, went to another church for 5 years, working for another pastor that was a little abusive, and then went to another church with the same thing. And so I began to start doubting. I started having dreams about him doing pornography and things like that going on. So as I'm trying to build trust with him, I'm having these crazy prophetic dreams, and I'm fairly prophetic. And so he would like, oh no, that's just fear, or that must be about somebody else. And so I had this men that I'm working for, and then this husband that's making me feel like I'm crazy, and I began to doubt me. I began to doubt the gift that I walked in. I began to doubt my call on my life, and I knew I had to lean into the grace that came with true forgiveness. I had to let go and let God.
Yeah. We went to this is in 2018. We went to church, a school building conference.
Yeah, the church I was working for asked me to start a school of ministry
Yeah.
at that church, and so they sent me to Bethel, and I was at the school building conference.
Yeah, and February 8th, I think, in the morning, Dawn wakes up. She's been having dreams all night that I have been doing porn. She's looking at my iPad. She can't find anything. She'd been asking me for years, and just like you said, my answer was always no.
But these were more than dreams.
They
These were
all
like
visions.
full out visions. I was in hotel rooms with him, different hotel rooms, watching him do pornography.
And she asked me that morning, and something inside me, it's like, I admitted it. I was like, yes. Yeah. I've been struggling with it for years. I've been hiding it from everybody. And I was tired. I was tired of lying. I was tired of not being there. It was holding me. I was prisoner to it. I was in that cycle. And I knew it would hurt her if I told her, but I knew I couldn't get out of this unless I told her. So I told her. It hurt. It sucked.
It sucked.
It sucked.
It sucked.
But she confronted me. And she did not disconnect. She was pissed. Rightly so.
I'm very verbal
She's a
processor.
very good She asked me a lot of hard questions for a long time. And for the first time in my life, I was able to be honest. I said, yeah. I was able to tell her exactly what was going on. And she forgave me. And that's, for the first time in my life, I realized what Jesus looked like.
Fall over.
Sorry.
But the thing was, when I found out, you know, that when you have rejection and you haven't fully dealt with it, it triggered all that rejection inside of me again. And it started coming back up, and I had pain, and I had anger, and I was afraid, and the depression started setting in, and I felt myself disconnecting. I didn't want to forgive, even though I knew everything inside of me I had to forgive, because forgiveness is not a choice. I forgive because I'm forgiven. Jesus has forgiven me a lot of stuff. And I forgive just because he's forgiven me. But I didn't feel like it. I didn't want to. I was mad. I was hurt. And one night, the Lord Jesus wakes me up, and he's in the room with me. It's the only time I've ever really had like this tangible encounter. He's face to face, he's standing there, he's got my hands, he looks me in my eyes, and he goes, Dawn, this is not about you. And I just sobbing, you know, the ugly tears, the snot, like you can't catch your breath. And I knew in that moment that him revealing all of this was about Jesus was finally going to give me the desire of my heart, which was a covenant marriage. And what everything that was unpacking was not about me. It was about what Jesus wanted to do inside my best friend. And that's the worst thing when you marry your best friend. When they piss you off, you don't have anybody else to yell at. So you have to figure out, I need to talk to my friend right now, so you're not my husband. So, yeah. So there was a little bit of that crazy stuff going on. But, and Jesus did more inner healing with me, more freedom, more identity. And I had to learn how to forgive Tim, forgive men in leadership, forgive me for believing the lie that I was made wrong as a woman. And I was even angry at God for not telling me sooner. Why did he wait so long to tell me? I had to deal through all of that. But again, and at that time, this was the second time that I walked away from ministry. When we left Atlanta, I walked away from ministry so that he could go back to flying. But this time I felt like the Lord asked me to just lay it completely down. And I stepped into a season of letting God define me, not my husband define me, not ministry define me, not my gifts define me. I'm just his presence. And unforgiveness of all the little things had blocked me from that true connection. So I started walking that out again.
Yeah. Dawn's forgiveness taught me what trust really looks like. Trusting God, trusting Jesus. I've been free from porn since that day. Because
Amen.
it's it takes constant work though. It takes constant work to stay connected. It takes constant work to stay connected. And but that's what it takes. Okay? We were married 30 years by the time we had this little one. Okay? We've been married 35 years now. And these last 5 years have been amazing. Have they been perfect? No. Have they been awesome? Yes. Okay? This is what covenant looks like. It's your benefit at my cost. Okay? I was not willing to pay the price up until that moment. I was playing it being a husband. That's what talking about being a husband actually meant.
So our covenant truth deepened. Covenant with God, he did what we couldn't. He's always faithful. Covenant with Tim, we went from conflict to contending to connection. And loving Tim and submitting my gifts to him is something that I love to do, because he looks for ways for me to show up and make room for me. I can't fully submit to God and not submit to his word regarding my marriage. So as I trusted my gifts to Tim, that gift, he started making room for me. God started making room for me. And now I'm on staff here at Upper Room. So God restored what I laid down at a much better place. I love being here. I love working for Kevin. He's amazing. Michael too, but I work directly for Kevin, and he's like the best of all the bosses. He's like up there really, really high. But I can trust God with my gifts. When I can't always trust people, I can always trust him. And but unity, true covenant unity, requires stripping, pruning, grading. It's a process. But our connection's stronger.
Yeah.
And more's coming. And God is a covenant keeping God. He really is, guys. Covenant's so much better than contract. And marriage is important to his heart. It's really important. We are the bridal paradigm. We're a prophetic picture of the bridal paradigm. And my marriage represents what Jesus wants to do with his church on earth. And we're still walking that out.
That's right. The song in our wedding was Genesis 2:23. For this is now flesh of my flesh.
And bone of my bones.
She shall be called woman.
Because she was taken